In Homer's Odyssey, there's a famous passage where Menelaus, one of the heroes of the Trojan War, is talking about when he was stranded on his way home and what he did to get back. So he was stranded with his men on an island off of Egypt, Pharos, and their food was dwindling and they weren't managing to fish. No, they weren't getting any fish when they tried. And one of the gods, he says, took pity on him, Eidothea, a nymph who was the daughter of Proteus, the old man of the sea. And um, sh- she said, I can help you. And he said, well, tell me which god I need to supplicate, because I've obviously upset someone and that's why I can't leave this island, right? So I must have upset one of the gods. And she doesn't answer him, but she says, look, Proteus, who knows everything, uh, he lives around here. And if you ambush him, following the instructions I'll give you, then you can force him to tell you. And so she gives him some instructions, right? Basically, the idea is that he rests there with his seals. And so you should pretend to be seals, as it were, lie down on the beach as if you were a seal, and then he'll include you in his herd. He won't notice you're there, and then when he goes to rest, you can ambush him in that situation. And that's what Menelaus and three of his men do. And when they do this, the Proteus, he changes shape. He changes into a number of shapes, becoming like a boar and a serpent and a number of other things, until finally he stops, he gives in, then he answers their questions, right? And so this is an important passage for later philosophers, in one sense because the idea that the gods know everything is repeated so many times here, but also because it was a problem for Plato, because Plato thought that the gods, since they're perfect, they shouldn't change, right? Because if you change, the idea is that you're going to change either to something better or something worse. If you're something better, then you're in a worse condition, but the gods should always be perfect. And if they're perfect, why would you change to something worse? So there's also the additional problem that change is, in gods changing shape in Greek myth is often associated with gods tricking people. And Plato thought that gods shouldn't trick people. So this was a difficult passage for Platonist philosophers, although it was important because it brought this idea that the gods know everything. So when the Platonist philosopher Proclus came to this, he really wrestled with the idea of what it means for God to change, right? So let me read from his commentary on Plato's Republic, which is where he discusses all these problematic passages of Homer. So he says, so this is around page 112 for people who want to follow. So this is one of the ways in which poetry describes the things which are unchanging, the divine things, changing into multiple forms, right? But it does this in another way whenever the divine itself extends various visions to those who gaze towards it, since it is a thing of many powers and full of all sorts of forms. On those occasions, in order to demonstrate the variation in the powers, Homer says that the thing itself, which has these powers in itself, changes into many forms, projecting different ones at different times. While it is always active through all of the powers because of the differing intellections of souls, it always appears different through the multiplicity of the powers which are embraced within it. So he's saying, so this is one way in which the poets describe the gods as changing. It's because the gods themselves, they have many powers, many aspects to themselves. However, souls, when they know the gods, they know these aspects one after another. So it appears to the souls that the gods are changing shape, when the gods are everything all at once, but it's just that the soul can only see one at a time. The same way that, for instance, we can only see the whatever face an object presents towards us when we're looking at it, and the object has to spin in order for us to see all its sides. So also, for the gods to show everything that they are, they have to, as it were, change shape and change form. And then he applies this directly to Proteus. It is in this way that Proteus is said to change his own form for those who look at him, presenting a different appearance at each moment. Even though he is lesser than the very first gods, immortal and not yet a god, and a servant of Poseidon, right? So Proclus has a complicated taxonomy of spiritual beings, and he brings it to the interpretation of the Homer text. And he says that so that he wasn't actually a god, but rather a servant of a god, Poseidon, but not yet one who has attained a leading position. Nonetheless, he has an angelic intellect. So this is a term that needs explanation. Allotted to Poseidon. And he both possesses and encompasses in himself all of the forms of things that come to be. So he's saying that he is a kind of intellect and intelligence. What exactly that is, I'll explain in another moment. And that he is subordinate to Poseidon. But he has the knowledge and form of all the things that change, right? So firstly, Eidothea is placed under his command, she being a daimonic soul related to the appropriate intellect, which is divine, and who has attached her own intellections to the forms of that intellect. So here he's being so Eidothea, which is the first character to speak to Menelaus and tell him how to get Proteus to talk to him. She is a daimonic intellect that is supported to Proteus, which is an angelic intellect which is supported to the god Poseidon. And there follows also a number of other souls, rational and eternal, which the myth refers to as seals. So the seals are a number of rational souls that are always following Proteus. For this reason, to Proteus is described as counting them, so he counts them before he goes to sleep. Because the poetry is demonstrating their eternity, this, I suppose, because the number of things coming to be and passing away is indefinite. So since he can count the seals, right, then they must be eternal souls, according to Proclus' interpretation, because if they were, just natural seals, the number of seals changes all the time. They don't have a definite number. And therefore, if they have a definite number, they're not going to be changing seals. So then, because Proteus is an intellect, and an intellect which possesses many powers and is entirely full of forms, as the partial souls gaze upon it and project the changes of their own intellections differently upon different forms, they imagine that the change belongs to the objects of intellections. This is why he seems to become all things to those clinging to him, as many things as creep upon the earth and water and divinely kindled fire. All of the forms that he has and has embraced, or rather all those that he is, always and eternally, seem to arise in turn because of the partial apprehension of those contemplating him. So, Proclus's interpretation of this episode is heavily what we would call allegorical. So the seals aren't actually living creatures from the sea, and the Proteus isn't a man that, or isn't a humanoid figure that goes and sleeps amongst them, and isn't a body that you could hold down, right? And his changing shapes, they're actually, it's actually something entirely that Menelaus and the other, and his companions experience because he is actually all those things at the same time, but because they are partial souls, they see these things one after another, right? So that's fine as far as it goes. There's a lot to understand here. But what's clear here, however, is that even if we accept Proclus's interpretation, this means that what Menelaus and his companions are doing here is not a physical activity, but it actually has to be something like a ritual to gain knowledge from the gods, right? And they are when they deal with the seals, when Menelaus speaks with Eidothea, when they're dealing with the seals, when they hold down Proteus, these must all be symbols for spiritual, intellectual activities that they are undertaking in order to obtain the knowledge that they want. So this is an important and interesting fact about Proclus's commentary on Plato and his interpretation of Homer, that very often he will indicate that there's more to the text than he's discussed. So he would just want to explain what this change of shape meant. And he says, oh, it's just change of knowledge. It's just change of intellection, right? You're understanding different things. And the poet describes this as the god change shaped. But if we follow this through, this implies that in Homer's text, there's buried, as it were, the outlines of some kind of ritual for Proclus in order to obtain divine knowledge. What is that? So this is one example of the kind of question that I want to explore in my upcoming course on a Platonist Odyssey, seeing Proclus's interpretation of some central events and motifs in Homer's epic poems, both the Odyssey and the Iliad. So this course will be starting on February 17th. And you can enroll for it below. It'll just take 3 weeks, and all the classes will be recorded if you can attend in person. And I hope to really enrich your understanding of the story of the Odyssey, seeing how, it's not just a fantastic story of involving lots of action and human drama, but for the Platonist philosophers, it had something to say about the structure of the world, the structure of reality, and most interesting perhaps, the two heroes of the two poems, right? So Achilles and Odysseus are people who know a lot about theurgy, about ritual. So you would never think of it, just reading from Homer that these are ritual experts. But this is something that Proclus seems to believe and will piece out, for instance, in this case it's neither of the main characters, it's Menelaus, but we'll piece out, like, as it were, the ritual subtext that Proclus seems to see in these texts, okay? So there's still a month to go, but I look forward to having interested students who have a background in philosophy or don't, who are just interested in enjoying the upcoming movie adaptation later this year with a more philosophical lens. And really, you can come without any background in ancient philosophy, and this will be an entertaining and interesting course for you. Thanks.